it back up. What do you think?
It's great.
Circular
So
firing
where do the
school.
wild animals come out to attack you?
Exactly.
What do you think, like a moving table like that restaurant?
We could develop this into something.
Fascinating.
This one looks good.
10 seconds.
This one looks good, they painted it.
Countdown.
5.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We'd just like to make note that this meeting is being telecast by Chelmsford Telemedia and recorded for later rebroadcast. Paul, considering this is your agenda, would you like to run us through it tonight?
Sure. Good evening. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming out on a busy time of the year. We've, once again, at the commencement of a new budget season, fiscal year 2020, which is hard to believe that that year is upon us. We've obviously just completed fall town meeting and all the actions there, following up and so forth. And so we now begin the process that's called for in the town charter for a joint meeting, the Board of Selectmen, School Committee, and joined by the Finance Committee to give an outlook and initial discussion of the upcoming year ahead. Obviously, right now, we're only in the second week of December. The process that goes out from here is last week at the State House, the state began its budgetary process by having its revenue hearing. At the State House last Wednesday, there were officials from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue and private economic firms, including UMass and other agencies, basically which they develop an economic outlook for the Commonwealth for the year ahead. And that hearing concluded on Wednesday. The estimates for economic growth of state revenues in the year ahead range from about 2% to, I think, a high of 3.2%. What will happen is in the next couple of weeks, we'll hear an announcement from the legislative and administrative leadership at the State House that they've arrived on a revenue number for the fiscal year 2020 state budget. And that way they all agree that that's the target number for the governor's proposal that will come out the last Wednesday in January. And then the House budget that will be released in April, and then the Senate budget that will be released in May, and then the resolution of the budget hopefully by the end of June. So what we have this evening is sort of the commencement of our process of this. Under our charter and bylaws, the town manager is required by the end of January, or with basically 90 days prior to the commencement of the spring annual town meeting, to submit a budget to the Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen. And so this is the commencement of that process. We've got sort of an overview from our town accountant, Darlene Lucia, who'll give us insights in terms of what the current year budget situation is in terms of revenues and expenditures to date. Just over a week ago, about 10 days ago, the town's capital plan committee culminated its process for development of a recommended capital program for the town to consider at spring town meeting. John Souza, who chairs that committee, our finance director, will provide a overview of that capital plan proposal. We'll then hear from Dr. Denise Pidgeon, the superintendent of schools of Neshoba Valley Technical High School, who will provide us with the update regarding the Neshoba Tech's fiscal year 2020 budget development process and some upcoming capital needs. We'll then hear from Dr. Jay Lang, our superintendent of schools in Chelmsford, regarding the status of the school operations and their identified upcoming needs for the upcoming fiscal year 2020 budget. I will then give a presentation of financial conditions of the town, revenue and expenditure forecasts, and other relevant information that pertains to the upcoming budget. We'll then have a discussion of the presentations materials we received. Following the conclusion of this meeting, there will be a brief executive session where the members of the Board of Selectmen, school committee and finance committee will go into a executive session or a closed session to develop strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the general government and school department employee labor unions. As many are aware, all the collective bargaining agreements for the general government and the school department, all 13 groups expire just over 7 months on June 30th. So we will we'll have a discussion in terms of how best to prepare for those. And then within that scope of that, we are expecting an arbitration award for the only unresolved union contract for the police sergeants union. So that's sort of where we are. And at this point, we recognize that time is limited. We have a busy agenda. We welcome our chair of the Finance Committee, Jim Clancy, to our meeting this evening. He came in right on cue. So now we can begin with all the important information. So we'll turn it over to Darlene Lucy, our town accountant, who will give us a report on the current fiscal year operating budget.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Good evening, everyone. First, we'll talk, I just want to talk about the revenues. These revenues are the numbers through November 30th. We'll first speak on the local receipts. We're seeing, I think we've pretty much flattened out on local receipts and revenue from prior year. I think we're seeing it's pretty level funded, and the way that the revenues are coming in, actually, most of them are coming in a little bit, the categories are coming in under than what we're seeing last year. First, our local receipt, our largest local receipt is motor vehicle excise. We're seeing I've seen a small increase, about $30,000 from the prior year. It's probably the first time in probably a 5-year trend that we've seen that. We will not get our large commitment for motor vehicle until the middle of January, so we're not really sure to see, then we'll really be able to see what our number is going to be. But I'm thinking we're probably going to be right about where we were last year, not seeing the large increases we were seeing over the last 5 years in motor vehicle excise commitments there. One area, though, that has stayed strong is the permitting. We are up about 31% from the prior year. We do have, the town has several large projects that have come about that have made, that's probably brought this number up. We've had several apartment complexes that have pulled permits. So this could be just another, again, 1 year. We'll be very curious to see next year what's in the pipeline and the stream for next year. This number may drop from this year to next year, but it is holding strong from the prior year. The rooms and motor vehicles is down tremendously, I think, really. We haven't seen that either in the last couple of years. Hotel tax was down last year only because we had some closed hotels and renovations, so we were hoping we were going to see that number go up. I'm not. We're actually down 15% from last year on the hotels. So that's a little bit troublesome. It's probably the lowest since 2011. So that's a little bit troublesome there. Meals tax has also declined about $11,000, almost $12,000 from last year. So again, these revenues, we're just seeing a kind of a decrease. What we are seeing upswing though is on the interest and investment from prior year. I think just a little bit with the bond market, interest rates are a little bit up. But as everybody is seeing the stock market in the last couple weeks, we may see this number when the Treasury Department, John's office, reports these numbers to me. I think the month of November and December, he reports the numbers from the prior month to me, we may see a decrease in these numbers. So they really do fluctuate based on the market. When the market's down, this is where we see this number. So, but we are up from a little bit from last year. So that's on local receipts. The real estate and property tax, we always do well there. We're up just, pretty much 4% from last year. State reimbursements coming in quarterly, those are fine. And the other financing sources are just things that we had voted at town meeting. Those are things that, from the free cash and things that we vote. Miscellaneous recurring, we are up a little bit on the SRECs, that's from the solar that we own. So that's good, because that number was really flat of last year, so we're seeing a little bit. Hopefully the sunshine continues. It's when we have very cloudy days, or if we have a lot of snow and the snow's sitting on those panels, we do not generate any solar. So those numbers will could go down, but we're seeing a little bit upswing from last year. So that's basically the revenues. Again, I'm trying to stay positive, but I think we really did peak last year with our revenue numbers. I think we're going to be seeing pretty much just a flat revenue. That there's not going to be one category that's really going to be exceeding from the prior year. The expense budget, departmental budgets, everybody is within the 40% funding level that they should be at. I don't have anybody that's exceeding that. I'm talking to all the department heads, everything's going fine with their departments. Not looking to probably see any departmental transfers or anything like that. We'll wait in the spring to see how fire and police are doing. If a lot of times it's in their overtime, or if they have a lot of retirees, we see that we may have to do some budgetary transfers for their departments. But as of this point, we look fine. What I did do, the next few pages are all the revolving accounts. I think it's good at least a couple times a year to review these accounts, look at the balances. These are revolving, similar, they are like the school lunch, the COA lunch, all of our revolving accounts for the school. They have their school choice, they have circuit breaker, those type of accounts. So just kind of stopping, the first account is it's the school lunch program. At this point, there's a balance in the black of 144. You can see they started the year with about $600,000. They are doing some work in the kitchens down there, so some of that, more expenditures going through there. The next group is just, those are revolving accounts, the dog office, the dog office revolving fund, just smaller accounts. Mostly those are our small insurance accounts, sealers, weights and measures, things like that. Then the next one is circuit breaker. Just to talk a little bit about that, you'll see that there's $2.7 million in the circuit breaker. What the school department does, and they're allowed to do this is something we've been doing, Joanna and I have been working, we do every year. All of the sped invoices are paid through the general fund. Then when we get in around the April-May timeframe, Joanna and I get together and we do actually a journal entry. The school department gets me all the backup, and we'll do a journal entry to move the sped costs over to the circuit breaker account. So they're not hitting that, they're not expending anything out of that account during the year. So you see that large amount of money. At the end, May or June, that account gets hit with a large sum of money as we move the invoices over. So that's just an accounting mathematical equation that we just do, that we work with every year. We've checked with the auditors, they're fine with this. This is just a standard. This is a lot of school departments, school districts will do it this way. The other ones are just the smaller accounts, lost and damaged books. We do have, you see the adult ed, the child care account. That's one that everybody, I thought we might have seen a small decrease in this child care account just because we now have full day kindergarten. I thought maybe that this account may decrease a little bit, but I'm not really seeing that. So I think we still have the child care is still being utilized. People still need child care. Even though if they have children in the full day kindergarten, they may still need me before daycare, after daycare, or they have smaller children that are just going to the daycare. So this program is still staying very strong, and it generates some good revenue. Out-of-town tuitions, summer school, those are all the accounts that the school departments have. School choice, you will see that I think there's going to be a discussion a little bit about school choice. I think Dr. Lang is going to speak to this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. There is a balance in there of $1.5 million. He does have a plan of what this money is going to be used for in the future, so I'm not going to talk about that too much, but he's going to go into that. The next group of accounts are the true revolving accounts, reserved for reserved for appropriation. Those are like the sewer, the betterment accounts. Those are the ones you see more at the town meetings. They're reserved for appropriation. They can only be transferred out at a town meeting and have a vote on that. So you'll see sewer betterments, sale of lots from the cemetery. Those are the accounts you see that we do transfers in and out of at town meetings. And then the last group is the actual, they're true revolving accounts. The dog park, the community action program. These are like things that are, they have to be specifically used for what they're set up for. The money goes in and they have to be used for that. A lot of them are they're almost like what they call the old time gift and donation accounts is what they are. And they always have just smaller balances. Usually, a lot of these balances are usually under the $20,000 mark. If anybody has any questions on any of those accounts, I'd be happy to.
Just one question.
Yeah.
Where will these monies gained from the sale of 101 Mill Road end up on here?
Yep, so that, because it wasn't taken as a tax taking or foreclosure, that money actually goes into a proceeds, that is one of the reserve for appropriation account, so it'll be reserved in a real estate account. That money will then have to be voted
At
to be
town meeting.
used for town meeting, to be used.
So it stays by itself?
And
Yeah.
can only be expended for future real estate or land acquisition. Yeah.
Yep. And that is really the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions on any of these accounts or any of the revenues, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Darlene, on the circuit breaker for the SPED, you said
Yeah.
that you guys only drew it up
Yeah.
in April. Do you discuss, like, on a monthly basis, what the number is, so you're aware that we're not overexpending or?
Yeah, the school department keeps a very, I mean, they know what they have in their circuit breaker, and they have a very good handle on what their sped costs are is going forward. They also, there's a line item in the general fund that's specifically for sped, so I can see that number, what's being charged in there also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just for 2 seconds, it's a cleaner way to really account for the out-of-district tuitions if you account for them all in one account. If you have the accounts hitting directly our out-of-district account and then our circuit breaker account, you've got just too many expenses kind of hitting multiple accounts. It's very hard to get a full picture of exactly what's happening with your tuition account. So this really, for all practical purposes, is the better way of doing it. We obviously watch the revenue payments as they come in over the course of the year. We will communicate with Darlene or Paul and his staff if there's any issues. But really making that one journal entry towards the end of the year is just a much cleaner way to capture that activity and then be able to report on it in future years.
Okay, thank you, Darlene. If there's no further questions for Darlene, we'll now move over to Finance Director John Souza, who will give a report regarding the fiscal year 2020 capital improvement plan.
Good evening, everyone. The Capital Planning Committee received requests for funding for 24 different projects totaling just under $5 million. And they had the very difficult task of trying to whittle that list down and make a funding recommendation for the projects that would be recommended to receive funding during FY20. The proposed funding level for the capital plan is $3.47 million. And you have a list with all the detail that was distributed that lists all of the projects that are recommended for funding. There are a couple of other financing sources, just to explain. There's recaptured funds of just over $12,000. This is money that's recaptured from prior year projects that have been completed. And with a town meeting vote, we're allowed to use those funds, that's where the name comes. We recapture those funds, and then they can be used to defray the cost of a future capital plan. The other item that we have is bond premium funds that are available to us. These were earned when we sold the municipal bonds back in last July to finance the FY19 capital plan. So the net amount that we'll be borrowing to finance will be just over $3.4 million. This is an increase of just about $192,000 from last year's capital plan. This next slide just shows a breakout of all of the different bifunctional areas. So when you look at how the capital plan's distributed, a couple of noteworthy areas would be public safety and public works together. Those items total about 49%. Public safety is up from the prior year because this includes the replacement of a fire engine. School buildings and school technology, if we add those two areas together, those account for about 30% of the capital plan in total. The next slide is a 10-year history just showing the funding levels. And one of the questions we received was, exactly what has been the historical breakout between school and non-school or general government departments. And you can see when you look back, fiscal year 13 is really the fiscal year that we increased capital funding from around 2.6 million to 2.9, if you see that on the chart. It's been around 3 million, sometimes as much as 3.2 to 3.3 over the next succeeding years. But one of the things that became apparent to us in the capital planning processes, given the number of needs that you see out coming forward on over the next 5 years, this is something we really need to look to increase going forward. We'll talk a little bit about that in the slides ahead. And going forward here, this next slide is a non-excluded debt service projection. Reason we wanted to bring this to your attention is this is debt service that's included in the town's operating budget and has to be paid within the confines of Proposition 2.5. So thus the name non-excluded debt. One of the noteworthy things on this slide is that you see that for fiscal year 20, for the coming year ahead, there's really just a slight change. The projected debt service is going to decrease slightly to 7.53 million from 7.55. When you look ahead at the next 5 years or so, one of the things you see is that the projected debt service is going to decreases in 21 around 382,000, 243,000 the next year, and so on. And if you add all of those 5 years together, it's a notable decrease of about 1.46 million. So this is something that, the reason for this is we have some older capital plans from previous fiscal years that are kind of rolling off the debt schedule. So this would give us the opportunity to increase the capital funding in the years ahead without creating any significant increase in the debt service schedule. This next slide, which you may have seen before, this is just showing an inventory of all of our town and school buildings and the year that they were constructed. When you look at the this kind of underscores the why we have so many capital needs. When you look at the column on the left, you see all of the schools are listed, and the youngest school is Chelmsford High School on this list, and you see that's 44 years old, all going up through McCarthy Middle School at the top of that column, which is about 61 years old. So you can see the need for why there is such a need for capital improvements going forward. On the right side, I would call your attention to some of the fire stations. We all think of the center fire station adjacent to the town offices. That is relatively new, but all of the outlying substations, south, west, north, and east, range anywhere from 42 to as much as 62 years old. And as we know, as we review capital projects that are in the pipeline for the next 5 years, for our 5-year capital improvement plan, for the next 3 to 4 years, you're looking at requests that are about $5 million annually. A couple of things just to discuss. We've been in discussions. The school department, school administration is working to explore additional capital investments that are going to be necessary really for exterior envelope of the school building, those type buildings, those type of projects. We'll be hearing more about those in the year ahead. And this is something I touched on an earlier slide. With the decrease in our non-excluded debt schedule, the town will be able to increase the amount of our annual capital plan to roughly around $3.5 million per year. And this would equate to about 2.5% of the town's total operating budget. So that concludes the presentation on the capital plan.
Does anybody have any questions for John regarding the, Glenn does?
Not so much directly at John.
Sure.
John had sent me an advanced package kind of to look at. And one of the items was that I was the liaison to the capital planning group, and he sent me some documentation concerning that. And one thing came up that I had some knowledge of, and it involved one of the items on it for the school department, which was I think the security upgrade, which includes the camera package, which I don't think anyone would argue is not what the world dictates has to be done today. But one of the items on there kind of suggested a problem that doesn't necessarily reflect on the school department, but reflects on a broader category. And that is that in that preliminary investigation you did on the cost, it mentioned a particular product in there, and that was a camera made by a company called Axis. Axis cameras are great cameras. I sell these products, but I also work for a company that does no business in Massachusetts with schools, but in Connecticut is probably the leader in supplying school equipment to infrastructure to schools. Axis cameras are basically a Mercedes. They are very expensive. They're made in Scandinavia. They are first quality in every respect. In fact, they have an office in Chelmsford, Axis does. But at the same time, I think that, and they are on the state bid list, but I think at the same time, not speaking directly to your purchase, but speaking to purchases in general, that we owe it to the residents of the town to always be looking at best value for products, as well as a need of a particular product to do a particular function. If that product is the only one that does it, then you go with it. On the other hand, if the requirements are somewhat general and there are other products that represent a good value against that, I think we need to look at that in terms of saving money. If an Axis camera, a basic Axis camera is, let's say, a small dome that doesn't move around, that's fixed, is, let's say, $550. That's an IP-based camera, but IP cameras range anywhere from $125 to $550 or a little bit more. Now, for this particular application, obviously you need a very robust long-term solution, but there may be products that are on the state bid list that meet the same criteria but would offer value. And if there's almost 200 cameras in the list, and if you saved $100 per camera, a couple $100 per camera, that's $20,000 to $40,000, which could be used somewhere else in the town, in your budget or in someone else's budget. So I just hope that when we do put out RFPs, that we put them out general enough that we're not so specific that they cater to a particular vendor that we may be doing business with previously, but include an array of vendors who can compete and offer the town the best value. So again, it's not talking to you directly, I'm really talking about when we're doing RFPs, that we be careful not to use language that may come from someone who's a friend of the school or friend of the town, DPW, whatever, that puts in X, Y, and Z, that make it almost mandatory that they get selected, that we need to make it broad, and I would hope that we would do that going forward. We're not doing it now. That's all.
As a member of the capital planning committee, I just want to roughly touch on that. There was a discussion the day of the evaluation about that very topic item, and we spoke to your technology person, and it was discussed that that obviously you go out to the most economic bidder. So that was discussed in detail with the people who are knowledgeable on technology at the time. And a member of our citizen member, Dennis Bach, brought up questions in that area. So I
Yeah,
just
just-
want people to know that that was discussed at the capital planning committee.
It was, and I think from the school perspective, and I'm sure it's the same on the town side, we do look to get the best value in any purchase or procurement that we participate in. When it actually comes to either dealing with state contract vendors, or if we put out an actual open solicitation, a request for proposal type format, we will be generic in our specifications. Certainly, there are minimum specifications that have to be met on equipment to services. But we try to get multiple quotes and multiple providers being able to provide a product. I can tell you the only thing that's not going to change in, and this was agreed upon a long time ago, the actual system that we use in the schools and in the town and the police department right now, we've already kind of settled on.
That's
and
S2.
what S2.
Right.
So
But
S2
there-
is
but a
not going
camera
to
is a
change.
general item
That's
that
correct.
goes into the
There are
system.
multiple platforms and different cameras that are interchangeable within that system. That would be kind of fair game, and we'd look for that when we was looking at proposals. It's just the system itself is not going to change, and I just don't want to have any people thinking that that's going to happen. We're going to keep that system, but obviously we'd look for best price and best value anytime we procure.
Are there any further questions regarding the proposed capital plan?
Do
Yes,
you
Emily.
So I know that recently the schools had major overhauls with the HVAC and the windows, that they are now Energy Star certified, or is it just green certified? I know that they received some sort of certification.
That would be
Gary's
the-
here.
Some buildings are Energy Star certified that are over 75% efficient. I believe it's 4 when it comes to schools. And everything else does have high quality windows and roofs and insulation that went in. So there is a better amount for savings to that. Plus the ESCO, again, in year 3, it's produced another successful year with about a $13,000 profit after the notice paid.
Okay, so that's great. So it sounds like, for those at home, that our schools are 75% efficiency? That's what you said?
You're over 75% qualified.
So our schools are Energy Star certified. I was just, I was looking at the ages of the buildings, and I know the older a building gets, often the less insulation there is, the less efficient it is, the draftier it is, and even when you get replacement windows, sometimes they don't compensate for the actual physical structure of the walls and the lack of insulation. So I was just wondering if numbers had been run taking into account the efficiencies of newer buildings and the insulation that allows them to be heated and cooled for less. So,
I mean, that was how the ESCO was developed, was looking at what the investments could be in energy efficiency, whether it be, new light fixtures, insulation, boilers, and so forth. We've never done a comparison between what a new replacement facility would be versus the current. And I think the reason for that is pretty obvious, given the capital investment that would be needed to replace a municipal building. But yeah, everything that made the cut was in the $19 million ESCO.
okay.
So and we continue to make improvements since that time. As part of the capital improvements for example, if we're putting in a new roof in at a firehouse, then obviously that would provide more insulation than the roof that's been, in place for the last, 28 years or so. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, if there are no further questions for the capital projects, I'm going to invite Dr. Denise Pigeon. There's an open spot up here at the table if you want to just sit next to Mike here. You're welcome.
I'll slide over, but you can
Okay.
jump in.
And Dr. Pigeon's going to give us a report regarding the, she can even, regarding the Neshoba Tech fiscal year 2020 budget development and upcoming capital needs.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here today. I think it's wonderful to have the opportunity to be here to witness the process of budget development in Chelmsford from start to finish. This is actually a goal of mine, and I've been on the road with Jean. We were in Groton this morning, so again, thank you for allowing us to be here. There we go. Just to let you know where we stand with our current FY19 budget status, we are doing well in terms of managing our FY19 budget. We have had some anticipated savings with some transition of staff members. We did have some transition in our facilities department and a position that we chose not to fill for the year. And we also had another teacher who was appointed as an administrator in another school district. We wish them well, and we chose as a mid-year transition not to fill that position. So we have had some savings in staffing, which is good because we've also had some increases in costs that were unanticipated. I'm sure this is not a surprise, but we have had some increases in special education costs that were unanticipated, in particular in transportation. And we'll talk a little bit about that further in the presentation. But overall, our FY19 budget status, we're on target for an E&D, I would say somewhere between 3 and 5% at year end. We did post our actuals on our school committee website. So if you'd like to take a peek at those, just visit our website, and they are on there. In addition, in November, our auditor did come to make the presentation on our audit to the school committee, and that has been posted on our website as well. In terms of FY20, we began the process of building our budget in October. We are still in the weeds, I'll be quite honest with you, in terms of moving this forward. We have a few more weeks to finalize the budget. But I wanted to share with you some of the major drivers that we have. So with a level service staffing budget, we're looking at increases with just, step and lane changes of about $220,000. In addition, we are anticipating several retirements coming up, and we do have a set aside that we need to do for an anticipated buyback for their retirement. In addition, our Middlesex retirement system payment will be up about 11%, just over 11%. And as I mentioned earlier, increases in services. We've had some students with more significant needs, in addition some transportation costs. We've also had some unanticipated homeless transportations that we've been required to do that have become quite expensive. In one instance, we have a transportation that's costing about $30,000 a year. Health insurance costs continue to go up. We are part of the Mass Bay Healthcare Trust, so we've been trying to hold those at a good level. We're anticipating a 5% increase. Our transportation contract will be up. We have some utilities that are going up and some that are hopefully going down, which I'll share with you on the next slide. And just as any other department, we're seeing increases in some of our utility services. In terms of looking to the future, what we need to add to the budget, we're still in discussions in terms of possibly adding a .5 social worker and an adjustment counselor type role to our guidance department staff to help address some of the increase in social emotional needs that we've seen in our students. We also have an aging van that will need replacement. We, looking to FY21, so not so much FY20, but FY21, we do have some capital expenses that will be necessary, and I wanted to share those with you in advance so that everybody would be well prepared. But we do have a MSBA accelerated repair project that is underway. I did mention that last year. The goal with this project, when we submitted the statement of interest, was to have it come online at the same time our other roof project is coming offline. Again, you heard earlier, to really manage those debt service costs. And then we do have some other capital costs that we'll be working through as a result of our full facility assessment. Last year when I came before some of the boards, I did share with you we were going out for full facility assessment. Again, I think it's a process that Chelmsford also participated in. We have been finding it to be most helpful, and will guide our capital planning as we move forward. So our roof repair project, we did submit the statement of interest, and that does cover, if you take a peek at the picture, it does cover all of the areas that are in gray with the exception of the two that are labeled 2003. Those are new enough that they don't need to be replaced, but some of them you can see are from the 70s, and they do need replacement. The yellow is the previous project that had already been funded through MSBA. So what we have submitted for is the sections of the roof that would fall under the MSBA required age. The cowl walls, we have 11 cowl walls that are above our technical program area, garage doors that have absolutely no insulation factor. They are that old. They will be part of the project. We have requested to go forward with the second boiler. As you know, last year we did replace one boiler in a very interesting way where we had to replace sections at a time. So we do have one brand new boiler, pleased to share, and the second we do want to replace. Now, the rooftop units are actually not covered under the MSBA reimbursement, but MSBA will be paying one way or another to take them off the roof and then put them back on the roof. So where they're aging, we think it's probably the smartest decision to replace those rooftop units with new ones because the cost of the installation will be covered through MSBA. And just at the end of last week, we were so pleased we got the reimbursement rate 55.5% reimbursement rate from the MSBA. This will be a warrant article request at Springtown meeting for request to go out to bond for this project. As you know, the facilities assessment, we hope to have a completed report, which we will also publish on our website, we're hoping by mid-January. Some of the items that are on there are things that we were aware of, but we have had some new things that have surprised us. And there's one that is significant that I wanted to bring to your attention that did catch us quite by surprise. So our fire suppression system throughout the building had been replaced during the building project during 2003. And we are finding in the building that if you were to go into a certain space, for example, 1/3 of the fittings in that space would be fine and seem to be in great condition, and the other 2/3 would be showing corrosion on only certain types of fittings. So we are actually in the middle of, we've through this facilities assessment, called in additional experts to look deeper into this. We don't know if this was an issue with the metal, an issue with the installation, so we are investigating to find out exactly what is causing the issue. But at the end of the day, we are still trying to determine whether or not this will be a significant project to rectify the situation, or whether or not we'll need to replace the fire suppression system, which, as you know, could be quite costly. So we are, again, I felt the need to alert the boards to this. We will have answers hopefully soon. There may be a possibility that we would have a second warrant article to request the cost for this fix as well, permission to bond to fix this as well. And we were looking at possibly even rolling it into the cost of the MSBA project. But those we'll have more information for you in the coming weeks. We do have some experts coming out next week and then the week after the holiday to finish that up. Other budget considerations, our stabilization account is doing well. It's just over 1.5 million. As you know, there'd been an ongoing goal to maintain between 8 to 10% of our annual budget. We have reached that goal. So we do not anticipate funding that in FY20. So we've reached that. OPEB continues to be a bit of a moving target with our liability. We are at about 13 million in our liability. Our balance in our account, which is actually very positive that we have an account, we're working on this. We have just over 750,000, and we are working on a plan to develop a policy where we can have annual funding of our OPEB liability. And as you know, the more we fund our OPEB, the better that is for the town as well. And I want to give a special thanks to Paul Cohen for serving on our OPEB trust, along with the town administrator from Pepperell. So it's wonderful to have our two largest towns sitting on that OPEB trust committee. So we do have some anticipated savings. I wish I had more slides like this. I do want to share some good news. We have entered into a very innovative agreement with Greater Lawrence Technical School District. So when they built their new high school, they bought into a solar farm, and I think they overestimated their energy needs, so they had all sorts of extra energy credits. So it was a year-long process of working with them, but we entered into an agreement, and we hope to have some significant savings in our electricity costs, which is wonderful, because I'm not sure how many people can say that they're going to save in electricity, but we're confident that we're going to. In addition, we've been incredibly aggressive with competitive grants, as you know, and we have, over the last several years, received 3 workforce skills capital grants in the amount of 1.5 million, which has really helped to bring many of our tech programs up to where they needed to be. Would have been difficult to do this without the grant funding. And more recently, we had another $120,000 state grant that we received to upgrade the Wi-Fi in the whole building, another wonderful project that we were able to complete last year.
When you say that you entered into an agreement.
Yes.
Did you have to give up something, pay to?
We buy their extra energy at a reduced rate.
Okay.
The agreement we entered into was that we would continue to work with them over numerous years, but we do have the opportunity, if we find another vendor that would be less expensive, to opt out of the contract.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, it's similar to what we have with the Chelmsford Housing Authority for some of the solar arrays on the schools and the DPW facility.
Just to give you a broad overview of our enrollment, so our enrollment compared to FY19, we did decrease 17 district students overall. 12 of those district students is a decrease from Chelmsford. We decreased 5 school choice students overall, and we had an increase in 3 non-resident students, or students that tuition in from towns that do not belong to a regional vote tech community. And this is just a slide to give you a bit of an overview in terms of our assessment versus our total spending history. As you can see, over the past several years, we've worked really hard to keep our assessments, the total to all of our towns, to be fairly even. The major increase that you are seeing, we've actually been trying to cover through school choice, through E&D, and through our other funds. But it gives you a broad overview of what our assessment history has looked like. And next steps in our process, we will be finalizing the budget internally throughout the month of December. In January, we finalize at the school committee level. And then we will be hosting our town officials breakfast on January 31st. I have sent out a reminder to Paul, and you are all invited. I hope you have a chance to attend. The students do serve breakfast, and we give a presentation on our budget. And it's right before we go to public hearing, so if there's any additional feedback, we're always willing to hear that. Our public hearing is on February 5th. Again, we have a requirement where we have to pass our budget 45 days before the first town meeting, and our first town meeting is in March in Westford. And that is my last slide. Any questions?
Do you have a ballpark number on the roof? I know you,
Ballpark number
ballpark
on
on
the
the roof
budget?
project, on the roof project.
Oh, on the roof project.
The roof project.
I'll let Jean give the ballpark, because I promised her I would never give a ballpark until I had a real figure.
Yeah,
Again, I'm not gonna hold you to it, but I mean, are we talking like
I'm
$1 million or, you know?
I'm thinking more like 4 million.
4 million, okay.
But last time, we were fortunate that
And
the
it
bid
came in
came
at
in half
half,
at what we
yeah.
anticipated, so we're crossing our fingers.
So the
right?
one challenge, and where we're having trouble even comparing the last project to this project, is that most of the roof that needs to be replaced this time around is covered in solar panels, which adds an additional cost. So we're working on that now. One whole array of them are Neshoba owned, so we have some control over that. But the other array is actually owned by Nexamp. And during the last project, there was a small portion of those owned by Nexamp, and we had to go direct to Nexamp and have them remove and replace. So we're investigating that and seeing if there's anything we can do in terms of that contract.
So is the 4 million the gross number or the net number to the district?
I'm hoping it's I think it's
Gross?
gross.
Okay, all right,
Yes.
okay, so basically, about half that would be the cost shared by the district towns. Okay,
And bonded over time with a 55.5% reimbursement rate.
great.
Denise, quick question. The last couple of years, the enrollment has been going down. Is that a trend that we need to talk about?
I hope not. We have had a trend over the past few years where we have had a decrease in district students. However, I would think that that's been a trend across all of our 8 towns as well. I think with the exception of one of our towns, we've been seeing declining enrollment across the board. So I do think it's likely a factor of that, along with the fact that 2 of our school districts did open a brand-new high school, which I think can also make a difference in district enrollment. And then I think that we also need to discuss possibly access and allowing all students to see the high school so that they know it's one of their public high school options. I'll tell you, one of the most frequent questions that I get is, oh, Neshoba Tech, how much does it cost for my child to go there? So we're working on making sure the word is out so that students know it is their other public high school option if they're interested in career and technical education. Yes.
2 questions. One is, I was confused when you were talking about the MSBA. Have you been awarded by them X monies, or is it that you've,
So last February, we submitted by vote of the board a statement of interest to the MSBA, so.
how much was that for?
There's no,
No
there's
Just
no
for a
dollar
project,
amount,
just
just
for
for the
project.
project. And we were accepted into the program. And now that we're accepted into the program, they assign us a project manager and they assign us a designer. We are currently in the design phase and we will submit the design. There's actually a meeting on December 20th of our school committee to review the design, which would be submitted by January 2nd to the board of the MSBA board. And then we would have some ballpark numbers that would come out, and the warrant article would have some ballpark numbers for annual town meeting.
When you were accepted, as far as I can remember, when Chelmsford was doing the same thing, when you reached that step, you had to pay a certain amount of money as good faith money?
We
Did you
did
do
have to
that?
take, yes, we did have to take a vote where we set funding aside to pay for our contracts.
How much was that? Around.
Well, we had to pay for the design phase, basically. And we had estimated 75,000, but
Right.
what happened was, we were really pushing the project quickly, and the owner's project manager came in much less,
Yeah.
but the designer, instead of just doing the original design phase, they put the whole fee in right through the
All
document
the way
phase,
through.
because the MSBA put out the project a month later than they typically do, and we have to hit the ground running for next summer, so we've been kind of pushing to get it done, and we get before the MSBA board in a timely manner, because they only meet every 2 months.
Right.
So,
We really wanted to hit the January 2nd submission date for design, because that would ensure we could do the roofs July and August. We don't really want to be doing a roof project when school's back in session.
And the second question was, last year, around this time, there was some talk that there were some other towns interested in joining your group. Is there any further discussions along that line?
We've had no specific town reach out to us in terms of joining our district, but we have opened up our presentations to some of the towns that do not belong to a regional vocational technical school. For example, we were doing presentations at R.J. Gray in Acton recently. So we do have some Boxborough students that have chosen to come to the district that don't belong to a regional voc, Sudbury and Carlisle. So we've been sharing information with those school districts, because they do have an obligation to let their students know where they can access career and technical education, because all students do have that opportunity.
But nothing official as
No,
far as any group
not at this
joining?
time,
Thank you.
but we'll explore it if they're interested.
But it's important to note that the roof program is a separate program distinct from the MSBA program that the town put into. They're
Yes.
two different programs. I don't want people to confuse
yeah,
the
there's
two.
there's
an accelerated roof.
fair, and then there's an actual.
Right.
Yes.
Core programs, so like most things, state government, they're complicated. And obviously, the obvious question, which we know, is they have submitted, as you said, their audit has been out, they have submitted their end-of-year report, but because the Department of Revenue prioritizes tax rate approval for communities like Chelmsford and so forth that have bills out, they sort of put regional school district excess and deficiency certification to the side. So the answer is they don't have their E&D certified.
We've
Submitted
submitted
it,
everything,
right.
but we just have to now wait. We'll
Right.
just wait.
It probably won't be till after the first of the year, the earliest. Thank you, Denise. Okay, next up is Dr. Lang, our superintendent, to give an update regarding the current fiscal year and the upcoming fiscal year, school operations.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I actually just have a few slides tonight, and then we'll talk about some of the cost drivers for our budget that we're looking at fiscal '20 and beyond. I know Paul actually covers a lot of this information in his slides, so I didn't want to be duplicative. But I did get some good feedback last year when we produced our budget book for the community that kind of talks about some of our spending and how we spend our money and where we spend it on, how we compare to not only surrounding towns, but also what the Department of Education calls our comparable districts. So they take a look at other school districts that are our size, that service the same type of students that we service in Chelmsford, and how we stack up to our comparable districts, as well as state averages. So, again, the latest information that we actually have on our comparable districts is 2016 data. This is the same information that was in our budget book last April, but just for the viewing audience, thought it's good to kind of take a look at this. One of the terms you hear talked about a lot is net school spending and how districts are doing as far as net school spending goes. Obviously, districts try to get to the 100%, that's the requirement, but most districts in the state are spending in excess of that requirement. This first slide just kind of shows you that the state average, all districts across the state are spending 125.1% of net school spending, so they're 25% above. Chelmsford is actually, again, this is 16 data, so this is going to change for 17, which would be the last year that was being analyzed at this point, was slightly above that at 27.1% over. But within our comparable districts, you can see we kind of fall in the middle. I think that's the trend you're going to see when we look at these few slides, that based on our comparable districts, spending-wise, we fall relatively in the middle. Certainly, and I guess one of the takeaways for you is the investment that you're giving and providing the Chelmsford schools, I think, is a worthwhile investment. I think you are getting a good return on your funding, and it's equitable, given both state averages and comparable districts. Next, student-teacher ratios, and oftentimes when you look at this, this is a number that seems really low, but what this is taken into consideration, it's a way to be able to just judge districts across the state. So this takes into consideration every single staff member within the building that's servicing children, and basically just divides it by the number of children in the program. So this is kind of evens out specialized populations, larger classrooms of students and whatnot. And again, the takeaways for us is we're right in the middle of our comparable districts, if you look at this data, and all but 2 of our comparable districts, including us, are actually below the state average. So we actually have higher student-teacher ratios than the state average, which, again, I do think is significant. When it comes to average teacher salary, which is reported quite a bit, again, you'll see that we're in the middle of our comparable districts, and again, below state average. So I think that is also significant by a few $1,000s. Only 4 school systems, Marshfield, Natick, Wakefield, and Milton, actually spent less per teacher than we did last year. Next slide, again, just talks about overall per pupil expenditures, because this number seems like a big number, and it is, but this is a kind of an all-in number. So this is every single expense within the school department that gets reported and reported out. And again, Chelmsford's falls pretty much smack dab in the middle of our comparable districts. So we're spending, on average, compared with our 10 comps. But all of the comparable districts, again, this is kind of telling, actually spend less than the state average overall. So I think that's significant. When you look at academics, which I'm not going to get into tonight because I know this isn't the forum, but we're well outperforming our comparable districts and obviously the state averages, yet only spending average. So I think that's significant. Similar to what, again, Paul will review on the town side later on tonight, just a couple of slides to talk about some of our cost drivers or some of our costs that we're taking into consideration for kind of a level service budget next year. So also, as Paul has indicated, all of our contracts are up on the school side with the exception of one union. We have one that's off cycle. Our custodians have an extra year on their contract because they had actually just formed last year. But all of the rest of our groups actually do end June 30th. And just to put some context with what a 2% cost of living increase would be, is just shy of $900,000 for that's all of our school department employees, what a 2% COLA would cost. Step increases would add another $643,000. So this has already been negotiated. This is already in the rates. These are factors that I have to roll in. So these are teachers basically moving based on completion of a year of service from, say, step 2 of a grid to step 3, 3 to 4 right along the way. In school departments, we also have what we call lane changes. So in addition to a step, if someone has a master's degree, but then they go and get a master's degree plus 30 credits, or a CAGS or a doctorate, they not only move down the grid, but they move to the side as well. So those we call lane changes, and that actually adds about another $115,000. That's all based on teachers who have actually told us they're in a program right now they anticipate changing by the end of the year. We have to budget and capture that. So overall, just staffing costs, some of the staffing drivers for next year, just about $1.65 million in the schools. And that, again, is being built into the base budget.
Can I ask a question? In relationship to the average teacher's salary, does that in any way impact or impede your ability to hire people? Because I see like Bill Ricca is significantly more average salary. So the fact that we're slightly lower than some of our companion towns, is that affecting your ability to attract teachers?
Oh, I understand your question. Not really right now. It really depends. We're actually okay on the lower end of the salary scale. On the top end of the salary scale, we're actually a little bit low compared to our comps. So we don't have a tremendous amount of difficulty attracting new people into the district. What we're going to start to take a look at is we don't see a lot of attrition of people leaving to go elsewhere, but that would be our concern, is that when people start to max out beyond step 7, 7 to 10 of the salary scale, isn't quite as aligned as some of the other districts are. Again, we're not seeing people jumping when they get to that point. I think they're in Chelmsford, they're really invested in Chelmsford. But on the lower end of the scale, the new teachers coming in, I think we're competitive. I think we have the same difficulty finding kind of hard to fill positions that every other school district does. So if you're hiring, we've had to hire actually several physics teachers over the last couple of years. Physics teachers are incredibly difficult. Oh, Dennis can attest to that. To attract. And we haven't had just one. I think we've hired last year 2 or 3, which is pretty significant. Specialized populations, if we opened up a special education program for some of our struggling elementary school students, that can be challenging from time to time, actually hiring really top-notch and qualified special educators, in particular sub-separate programs. But any district is going to have that challenge. I think we offer a very good setting and a supportive setting. So we kind of manage that. And I do think at the entry level, we're competitive. So I'm not seeing that as a huge issue.
And as a tag-on question, do you foresee many retirements this year? When's the date for?
That's a challenge for us, as you know, from being on the school committee. So staff is supposed to tell us by a certain date, but then they have a window where they can actually kind of recall and change their mind. So that change their mind date isn't until sometime in January, I believe. So I think we have 8 to 9 individuals that have anticipated they're considering retiring at the end of the year, but again, they can pull back until December. So for budget planning purposes, we have to be kind of cautious on that. There are some people that really aren't sure, and they might just be kind of putting in. Some we know are definitely going, so we can account for them, we account for the savings. But if they tell us ahead of time that they're leaving, they also get a buyback provision. So in the first year, that often offsets the true savings to the employee. But we calculate that all into the recommended budget that we put out the end of January, early February. Anything that's known at that point in time.
I just wanted to add that at this point, our retention rate is about 89.2%. And when you take a look at the total number of teachers, which is 372, between the ages of 57 and 64, we have 110 teachers. And over the age of 64, we have 27. So I think that is something that we're going to be taking a look at as time goes on.
Yeah.
What do you mean by buyback?
So there's, in the contract, in a lot of different contracts, there's a provision that basically allows for someone to buy back a certain percentage of unused sick leave or unused sick time.
Right.
So it's something along those lines. It's a little bit different by bargaining group, but basically, if they do retire, they're in good standing, they tell us by the date that they're gonna retire. When they leave, they can receive a payment, basically, for unused time.
It's capped? I mean, it can't go beyond a certain point?
Yeah, it's depending on the bargaining group, but it's a percentage of the last year's salary, correct?
25%.
Yeah, but it's capped at 25% of the last year retiring salary.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So on the personnel side, just to recap for a second, about 165 is the carrying cost for all of our different anticipated employee costs for next year. And then we have several smaller costs that we just have on our radar because we're in the middle of either looking at or negotiating contracts. But we actually had a 5-year contract with RICO. It was a photocopier contract in the district that's ending on June 30th. So that's something that we have to look at, but we know that cost is going to go up next year. The $35,000 was anticipated. We have 2 special ed contracts, one for regular education transportation, one for special education transportation. The regular ed contract is going into year 3 of a 5-year contract, so at least we know that the rates are determined, and that's a locked figure. I don't anticipate adding the number of big buses that we have in the district, so that's just the actual percentage increase for that contract. The special ed contract is a little more fluid, and that actually just takes into consideration the rates are locked, but it's all depending on the number of vehicles you're actually operating to get the students to and from the schools in our district and then also out of district. But $80,000 is anticipated as an increase in special ed transportation costs for next year. We have the last year, we actually implemented iReady as a diagnostic software tool that we're using school district-wide. We've had a lot of different pilots over the last number of years to try to pick an actual product, and that was one we selected last year, and we're going into the full implementation phase, elementary right through middle school next year. So we know that that is a $75,000 cost approximate that has to get built into the base budget, and then that's it. That'll just be a recurring cost every year as far as software renewals. At the end of this school year as well, 3-year cleaning contracts are up with our custodial cleaning services. 3 years ago, we had decided to stop totally outsourcing our custodial cleaning, kind of do a hybrid model, so we actually employ a full-time custodian in the school department during the day, and then we contract out the cleaning services at night. It's really been a nice model that's worked very well, but we do know that we have 3 different cleaning companies that are working with us now. One group doing the elementary schools, one doing the middle, and one doing the high school. We're hoping that they actually do rebid, but that is a bid situation. So we also do know that because of different increases in minimum wage and things like that, that the rates will be going up next year. The best we can anticipate at this point is about a $40,000 increase over the course of those 3 contracts. But we're very happy with that model and the services we've been receiving. It's been very good. Lastly, again, just anticipating a 4% increase over actuals on utilities, natural gas and electricity. We'll obviously work with the town as we get closer to the budget to see if there's any way to kind of hone some of those numbers. It's not a huge number, but $44,000 in cost there. So when you take the personnel costs and then the non-personnel costs, it just puts us shy of $2 million, basically our kind of carrying costs or budget drivers for fiscal '20 and the budget that we're working on. We also, similar to Neshoba, started working on October on our budget development. We've had individual school meetings. We've been putting our staff salary book together, which is, again, kind of the big driver for our budget. And we'll be working over the month of December into early January to refine that. And then we're anticipating, we actually provided the school committee with the budget schedule and timeline at their last meeting, which has us actually presenting the superintendent's recommended budget at their first meeting in February, which I believe is the 4th or the 5th. It's whatever that first Tuesday in February is. We'll coordinate with Town Manager Cohen, because I know the town budget will be coming out the week before that, to try to make sure that we're aligned with our recommendations. I think we've done that the last couple of years. It's worked well, and obviously want to continue with that. But that's the information I have for you this evening. I'm happy to answer questions, and more questions may come after Paul's presentation, but just wanted to kind of provide a little bit of a snapshot from the school side.
Yes, John?
Just one question. You had submitted again for the high school for a project of interest. When do you anticipate they'll be notifying their partners?
I think very soon. This was the time that we actually learned last year, and there are two different projects. So Neshoba Tech had applied under the Accelerated Repair Project for a smaller scope project. So that's actually handled on a different timeline than the core projects. We applied under the core program, which was an April submission, and I do know that the board is going to start taking up those recommendations very soon. So I would anticipate over the next week or two actually finding out. It is not uncommon, as I've mentioned before, to have to apply multiple years to get into the mix. I was talking to a superintendent recently who is hoping to get in the mix this year, and I think they had applied 7 years in a row. So it does take some time to get into the core project. We will obviously look at the accelerated repair for some smaller projects in town as we look at our capital list. If there are ways to be able to apply and get 50% reimbursement for, school roofs or boilers or furnaces and things like that, that's certainly on our agenda. And you can apply for multiple accelerated repair projects at the same time. You can only apply for one core project at the same time. But we can have a core going at the same time we have accelerated repair. So we'll obviously try to do that to get about a 50% reimbursement for us too on those projects. As soon as we find out, we'll let you know.
And you're also examining the school facades as well. We've completed the Dora Whittier study, but the unknown for capital is you're still looking at the facade of the buildings.
Correct.
As well.
Like all the air infiltration and different things along
Exactly.
those lines. Correct.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Um,
This is meant to be a
On
discussion.
On the matter of the balance on the school choice and the balance on the childcare / community ed, Paul, are you later going to speak to a plan for how you plan on allocating that, or?
I can. We can talk a little bit now. We can talk.
I don't
want
want to adjust the agenda, but I was curious about
Yeah.
that.
I mean, the school choice funds, we are internally working with the school committee on some recommendations for those funds. I think there's a note in the presentation that, that basically indicates we haven't allocated those funds since 2015, which is true. When I came here, one of the things that we were actually trying to get our hands around were some of the special ed costs and trying to build a reserve of special education funds to be able to help provide a little bit of a buffer for some of those unanticipated costs that come up from time to time. Really within the school committee's purview are two funds where they can set aside money to be able to do that. One is school choice, because it's an annual fund that goes to the school committee, and they need to then further appropriate it for some type of an educational use. And the other is circuit breaker funds. So I had wanted to get to, and we've talked about trying to get to about $1.5 million in set aside for school choice funds. And I really didn't want to aggressively spend, in circuit breaker funds. And I didn't want to aggressively spend school choice funds until we had that cushion. So at the end of the last fiscal year, we actually not only hit the $1.5 million, but I believe we're at about $1.9 million off the top of my head in set aside for school choice. Circuit breaker. So I'm sorry about that. So we actually certainly have the set aside we were looking for. That then enables us to utilize and come up with a strategy for utilizing school choice funds. So in January, we're actually going to be laying out a couple of different projects for the school committee to consider. One is technology-related, around a mechanism to be able to actually allocate those funds in their budget. I don't have any plan or proposal for you this evening, but I can tell you it is on our radar, and it's actually now able to be looked at because we have sufficient set aside in circuit breaker.
And to the community education fund of $1.4 million, now that you know that full-day kindergarten isn't restricting that revenue, I mean, you have that money, and it's been a fairly consistent amount for, I want to say, like 10 years.
Yeah, to back when you were on the committee.
Yeah. Which back then I was happy to stockpile back then.
Change your tune, Kathy.
Admittedly, depends what level you're sitting on.
Guess so.
But,
Yeah, we're, on that
So-
particular fund, we're not trying to stockpile that one either. There's a couple scenarios. You know, we do actually try to utilize some of that funding when we can to make enhancements both programmatically, you know, at the school, not only facility-related, but educationally related as well. We've looked to do some technology enhancements in the school. We're going to continue to do that. This particular fund, and I think I've mentioned to Paul, the funny thing, but it's not really funny, about it is that every time we actually work with community education to try to spend down some of the funds, we'll say, you know, create a new program or whatnot. Every new program they create makes money. So it's a situation where, you know, they are actually trying to spend down funds. It's a good news story because they're covering all their costs and they're actually still generating profit. So, you know, obviously that is something, I don't want to see them cutting too close to the bone, but they do have money there to invest, and they actually are offering additional programs and services. I think we see just a healthy demand for our before and after school programs, regardless of the full-time kindergarten programming. People need this programming. I think we've seen our vacation week programs take off, we've seen our summer programs take off, and they're just generating money, you know, which is a revenue, which is a good problem to have. But again, I think you'll see over the years to come some investment in additional, you know, facility enhancements, but also educational enhancements within the program itself. Buying additional curriculum materials and things along those lines that actually benefit kids at the Westland School, at the ComEd building, which are allowable under the regs. So it's on our agenda. I mean, it's certainly something that we watch, and it's a good problem to have.
I'd like to see some of it go into the Westland School facility.
Me
Because
too.
I think that's a facility that, you know, is in need of some attention and will, you know, need some investments. We've seen that in the capital planning process. And then going back to the school choice monies, you remember Kathleen, we were saving that for the full-day kindergarten
Yeah.
expenses. Well, we've kind of crossed that Rubicon as well, so we'll see where we go. But any other questions for yes, go ahead, Ken.
What are the items that are available in our accelerated repair?
Roofs, boilers, furnaces,
Windows?
Windows.
Windows.
Just
We-
those four?
we- Yeah, we've previously participated in the windows and obviously roofs in prior fiscal years.
I've
But
done,
right,
I've done
yeah.
Doors and windows as well.
Yeah, but
Actually, it's really not. supposed to
Unfortunately,
be
our
doors.
envelope is pretty good in terms of our roofs and, you know,
Right.
reason we're not submitting one, or haven't submitted one in recent years is we're in pretty good condition. And if you look at the 5-year capital plan, we're really not looking towards those type of accelerated program qualifiers, such as those items. Part of that was done by the ESCO. We did a major investment in the boilers going from, you know, from steam heat to hot water and so forth. And so that sort of explains how we sort of got to where we are today.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I'll move on to my presentation of providing a summary of the financial condition of the town and sort of where we've been and where we may be headed. But I think if you just sort of transition from Dr. Lang's program to mine, you can see that just opening the doors in September with really effectively no changes, it's $2 million to run the school system beyond where we are today. And I think we oftentimes hear frustration, and particularly this time of the year when, we've completed fall town meeting and the tax rate's being set and bills are going out, people get frustrated. Well, why do our expenditures go up? And I think hopefully my presentation and Dr. Lang's presentation and even John's in terms of the capital, there are significant needs out there in the community. So again, I'll start with sort of looking at where we've been and where we're going. And so the first one is, how is the budget allocated? Again, we're roughly running a $132 million budget in the current fiscal year. And you can see roughly half of that in terms of the departmental appropriations in terms of the public schools and Neshoba Tech goes to education. Another 29% goes to benefits and insurance and debt service. So you can see the biggest cost drivers in the community is $59 million for Chelmsford Public Schools, $3 million for Neshoba Tech. That puts you to $62 million. Benefits and insurance, another $23 million. Now you're at $85 million, and then debt service, another $14 million. You're approaching $100 million. If you then go to the remaining, what we call general government operations of the town, it's roughly 25%. And you can see the numbers there from public works, facility, cemetery, all the way down to the library. And so oftentimes people say, well, why can't we control our spending? Why can't we cut the budget? And they'll reference a department such as public works. Well, again, you could shut down the whole, public works operation, and again, you're not even hitting at 8 or 10%, in this case, 7% of the town's operations. So again, if your bill's $7,000, and if you shut down public works, you'd probably save, $700, not even $700, you'd probably be on $600 or so. So I think trying to give some sense of magnitude in terms of, if you wish to come in below levy limit, well, then you really have got to look globally, and obviously there's items that are fixed, such as debt service and so forth, and obviously the schools are and obviously Neshoba Tech is fixed once the budget's set, so you're really going into the core operations of schools, and again, some of the slides, and we'll see, and you've already seen some of them in terms of class size and so forth, I think demonstrate that Chelmsford isn't living lavishly. In terms of the tax bill, we're still awaiting formal approval, but the expectation is any day now we'll get the formal blessing from the Department of Revenue. But the expectations is the average single-family tax bill for this fiscal year that we're in right now that expires on June 30th is $7,001. Let's just call it $7,000. And again, if you sort of apportion that bill to the operations, if you're writing that check for the average single-family home, which is $428,000, well, again, of that $7,000, over $3,000 goes to public schools, and you can see benefits and insurance. So again, it's the same analysis, but you can sort of see, how it makes in terms of the tax bill. So again, if you did want to fund the fire department, you'd only save $300 on your bill, which out of a $7,000 bill isn't going to get you anywhere. And obviously, you can't not fund the fire department. So again, we hope it gives you some sense of magnitude, because if your bill is $7,000. And we're appropriating $100 million in property tax levy. If you want to cut that $7,000 by 1% or $70, you've got to cut $1 million in spending. And if you're going to cut $1 million in spending, you've probably got to at least cut half of that in the schools and half in the town side. And again, if the town side is only 25% of the spending, you're having a major impact, because again, you can't go into areas such as debt service, or the assessment to Neshoba Tech and so forth. So again, it's meant to give some insight as to what's going on. Let's look back 10 years and say, geez, what have you been doing over the last decade? I mean, I know what I've been doing. I've been here, this is my 13th year in Chelmsford. How have we been spending? I'll be starting my 30th year in January as municipal administration. I think what you see here is in 10 years in the town, the budget's grown by 39%, or $37 million. But if you look at how that expenditures have been divided over the 10-year period, you can see it's been roughly proportional. If the budget's increased by 39% over the last 10 years, the school budget's gone up 38%. So again, I think the schools have been giving a proportionate share of the town's budget. Where you've seen the drivers, Neshoba Tech, but that's an enrollment-driven one. And again, because they came out of their construction project, and so obviously you see an 87% increase in the assessment for Neshoba Tech as our alternative high school and technical services for the community. And then obviously a big driver, and we'll see more detail of it, you saw it in the Neshoba Tech presentation by Dr. Pigeon, benefits and insurance. they're above 2.5%. You heard her presentation, over 11% is their new Middlesex County retirement assessment, and then they're forecasting 5% increase in health insurance. Same thing. So that's where you're seeing a lot of the costs driven by benefits. And this is including the town's repeated, I think we've done 3 efforts at plan design reform in accordance with state law. So it's not as though we're just holding our plans constant. Our plans now have high co-payments, high deductibles, and so forth. But you'll see later on, you'll still see growth in the enrollment, particularly by retirees.
Paul?
Yes.
What percentage of the benefits insurance is Chelmsford Public School employees?
Roughly 2/3. 2/3 of the employees are school employees, and about 1/3 is the town. We do break that out monthly, so we do have those actual numbers, but they also have more than 2/3 of the employees in the town. So we don't see anything disparity within the groups in that respect. And so, again, any other big driver is state assessments and overlay, and overlay is the amount you set aside for property tax abatements. That amount really hasn't grown over the year. What it is state assessments. And you see later on, we get assessed for charter school students who will leave here, and most of them go to Innovation Academy, and also school choice out students. And so those are state assessments that come on our cherry sheet, and you can see that's having, and you'll see it a little later, having a disproportionate effect on our budget. If you go back, we'll just bring it in a little closer, 5 years, you sort of see the same story. 19% budget increase in 5 years in the town's budget, the school's 19.8%. So again, proportionate share, and you can just sort of see it. The numbers vary a little more in a 5-year period, because if you hire, for example, in the general government, we hire a business development director, that pushes you up over 19% because that's a new position. But roughly the same story there in terms of the 5-year period. When you look at how the town's budget is funded, the $132 million, the big thing is the property tax. Right now, more than $750 million, or 77% of the budget, or over $101 million, comes from the property tax levy. And you see state aid is only 13% of our budget, or just $17 million. Local receipts is 8%, or $10 million, and then available funds is 2%. So the bigger story, though, is what's happening over time, and as we feel it and we see it, the big driver over time is the property tax. Over the last 5 years, the property tax has risen by over 20%, or $17.3 million, while state aid has only risen by $2 million, or 13%. So again, if you compound 2.5% over 5 years at state aid, you can see you're not even there. And then local receipts are up by roughly $1 million, and available funds up by nominal amount. We obviously see continued growth in the property tax valuation over time, particularly towards residential. Most of the new construction that's out there, even with the zoning reform changes and so forth, is in residential. In terms of residential valuations from multifamily complexes. So right now, 82% of our valuation is residential, and less than 18% is commercial valuation. The average single-family bill, as you can see, again, if we use the roughly $7,000 for the current fiscal year that we're in right now, a couple of things to note there. Obviously, the average single value of a single-family home has come back well over the pre-recession amount, so we're now at $428. Obviously, the tax rate has dropped significantly. We're now at $1635, which, if you just looked at tax rate, is the lowest tax rate in 8 years. But again, we know it's not tax rate that matters, it's tax bill. And as you can see, the 5-year increase in the tax bill based upon this year's actions is roughly 14.41%, which is just over about 2.5% per year if you compound that number based on the split that took place this year in the tax levy. And then, obviously, our ranking, as you look over time, we are in the high 60s, and we've traditionally been around 70, high 60s. And if you go back before 2004 and back into the 80s, Chelmsford has always been there. Some cases high 50s, 60s, about 70. My guess is you'll see that number drop significantly into the 70s this year, based upon the actions at the Selectmen's meeting last week. But I think more notably is the fact that, yes, taxes are going up in Chelmsford, but they're going up across the Commonwealth. And that's why the ranking is really an important number. The important story, and I know many have seen this presentation in the past, have seen this, and I'm going to keep reiterating it, the biggest problem we have in local government is the declining level of assistance from our partners at the state. Let me give you some concrete examples. Chapter 70 education funding. In the last 5 years, It's gone up, this is your education money, from 10.22 million to 11.05, 8%. Compound, take 8%, divide it by 5 years, compounded. You can see it's not even keeping pace with inflation. It's not keeping pace with the cost of education, as you see in our per pupil cost and our budget growth. It's really disappointing. And the other thing that is that the current administration has adopted a proposal of they're going to grow the increase in the next item, the unrestricted general government aid, at the growth in the state budget. So that's why you see that number increasing by almost 20%, 19.58%, from 4.39 to 5.25. But they didn't use that same formula for the education funding. And there's two reasons for that. One is the education funding is about double statewide than what it is for the unrestricted general government aid, which used to be called lottery aid. And so it's an easier fix to achieve because you're sort of increasing a smaller number. But I think it speaks to the underinvestment in local education by the state. And also there's underinvestment, many of you saw a panel that was in town last week from the economists. There's also been an underinvestment in higher education at the state level as well, if you look at these metrics. And so again, even if you look at the unrestricted general government aid, the lottery aid, since fiscal year 2000, almost 20 years ago, we're actually receiving less funding from the state, almost 12% than if we were sitting in this room in 2000. And so again, it's a telling story, the partnership with the state. Now, there was an effort, and you saw it got scuttled. That was the idea. They're going to do that tax surcharge on millionaires. That went out the door. Right now, that we don't know what the plan is on the table, but I think if you objectively look at what's happened, this was a status quo election in Massachusetts in November. You have the same governor, same legislative leadership, pretty much the same group of legislators going back. So I think to sit here and to expect that we're going to get a different outcome in the next 4 years might be a bit unrealistic. What you are hearing from, though, is, there's talk about education reform in terms of the funding formula, because the current funding formula was adopted over 25 years ago in 1993. However, when you listen to what they're talking about in terms of the funding, there's a mention of equity, but the real thing is they want to direct the dollars to the low-performing districts and the highest need districts. That's not Chelmsford, folks. So we're hopeful that we'll get some additional funding, but it was stated again today by the Secretary of Education, and you hear it in the legislative leaders, there will be some discussion of ed reform in the new session coming up. But I think to sit here and anticipate that we're going to receive a windfall for Chelmsford, I think is a bit unrealistic. And soon I'll give you some numbers that sort of show you that the Chapter 70 funding in Chelmsford isn't an anomaly with our peer communities as identified by the State Department of Education. So again, you look at another set of charts, and this is where it really meets the road. You can see that if you went back, go 10 years back, state aid was almost 16% of our budget. Now it's just over 13% of our budget. And so if you read the language in red, there's only been 16% increase in state aid during the past 15 years. That's 1%, without even compounding. That's the story. And so the reason we rely on the property tax here in Chelmsford is that's the only revenue we have. And as you heard earlier tonight, we're not seeing any growth in the local receipts for motor vehicle and meals and so forth. So that's really the only avenue going forward, and I'll give you some more detail on this coming up. But here's Chapter 70 funding. Again, education funding compared to our comparable as identified by DESE, and then you see the last three, it's kind of hard to read, they're in purple, Drake, Tewksbury, and Westford, what I call our neighboring school districts. You can see that the number of Chapter 70, the penultimate column there, Chelmsford's 11 million isn't an anomaly there. In that column, you see our comparable communities are often under 10 million. Natick, 9.8, Melrose, 8.4, Walpole, 8.1, Easton, 10 million. What is the anomaly, if you look at this characterization, is Westford. And we know the formula, the state education formula that's been in effect, since 93, favored growth districts. But if you step back and see where things stand today, according to the state data, and this is not mine, this is Department of Revenue data, a community like Westford compared to Chelmsford has a higher per capita income in the community, higher equalized valuation per capita in the community, and they have the slightly decrease in enrollment than we have, but yet they receive almost 50% more Chapter 70 education aid than we do. So we're receiving 11 million, they're receiving 17 million. So that's what shows you that something's askew. And again, if they do reform, they're not going to take money away from any community. So the question is, how do you raise all boats while also meeting their need to hit the low-performing and high-need districts? So hopefully it's insightful. Again, the priorities that I've had since I've been here and continue to be is, the priority in this community, and obviously where your tax dollars go and what the value of your property and so forth is education. And then we obviously have a core fundamental of public safety. In public works is part of public safety, particularly this time of the year with road conditions. And then we've got to maintain our infrastructure, both facilities as well as what's in the ground, and also public health and human services. Looking to the data of Chelmsford Public Schools funding, Dr. Lang earlier mentioned our funding levels in terms of net school spending. The latest that I can see in terms of FY19, our required net school spending is just over 51 million, and our budgeted is almost 70 million. So we're roughly 36% over the requirement. And again, as Dr. Lang noted in his presentation, that's not like an item for concern. It just shows you that perhaps the required level of state spending isn't really an accurate number of what it takes to educate students, because we're not. I don't think we're lavish in the community. But I think the thing to note, and again, we're approaching the year 2020, and I think people got to realize we spend $70 million for school expenditures in Chelmsford. I think people got to realize that $70 million. I think, it's where we are today, and I think many of us have been in this community since the 80s and 70s and so forth. I think sometimes you got to think of what the current operations are in today's world. And if you look at enrollment, and if you look at teachers and student-teacher ratios, was noted earlier, and it was noted in Dr. Pidgeon's analysis, like Neshoba Tech, our enrollment is declining. That's the demographics. We saw a little bump in 18 because of full-day kindergarten, because they counted the full-day kindergarten, with the full day of all students, and obviously some people would hesitate putting the child into a half-day program, and we assume we're all now into our second year. I've not seen the 19 numbers, because I know the state's been hesitant to release those, but I think it's realistic to assume that they're not going up. And so, again, we're roughly 5,000 students enrollment, again, roughly a 3% decline over the last 5 years, and you can see our student-teacher ratio has been trending in the right direction. And you can see an increase in teachers obviously driving that if you've got declining enrollment and your ratios increasing. The per pupil expenditure, the state hasn't released the data for FY18 because they're still sorting the submissions from the end of year reports. But the last year that was available is FY17. It was over $14,600 per pupil across the Chelmsford school system. So again, going back to my earlier point, if we're spending $70 million in education, and if we've got 5,000 students, you can do the math, our per pupil expenditure today likely exceeds $15,000 per student. So that means if you're sending a child to school, it's costing the community $15,000. So if you look in a classroom of 20 students, you can see what the value is sitting in that classroom, of $300,000. And then if you see what it costs a student to educate them from K to 12, it's quite an investment in what we put into the community. And certainly those who look at college costs, you're sort of seeing some numbers. But again, look at the cost at the local level, $15,000. And at a place like Neshoba, which doesn't have an elementary education, and they're obviously educating, at technical services for high school students, their costs are over $18,000. So I don't think sometimes people, and yeah, we recognize the tax bills are significant, but if the average tax bill is $7,000 and it's costing you $15,000 to educate a student, hopefully it gives some sense of why things cost the way they do in the year, as we're approaching the year 2020. And again, if you're looking at the per pupil expenditure comparison, again, it's not out of line. I put it in a chart, and because I know some people look better at graphics than the numbers, but you can see Chelmsford right there in the middle, as Dr. Lang noted earlier. We're right there in those peer communities. The only interesting thing is if you look at our neighboring communities, for whatever reason, Barica and Tewksbury are at the far right end of that chart. I don't know what the explanation for that is, but it is where they are. But you see Drake almost to the left end. And Westford is right next to us. It actually spends slightly less in the most recent data in FY '17 per pupil. So again, Chelmsford is probably where it should be for education spending. The other thing to note, you heard it in Dr. Pidgeon's analysis earlier today. Her presentation talked about how their special ed costs are growing. You're seeing the same thing happening in Chelmsford. I mean, just go back 3 years. We had 68 eligible students for circuit breaker. We now have 92. So when we were putting in a net claim of Chelmsford of $3.16 million in 2016, we're now putting in a claim for $4.3 million. So yes, you do get some reimbursement on that. And again, the key category there is the right-hand column of what the percentage that the state's actually funding. Ideally, they'd fund 75%, and we're trying to get that commitment again this year. But you can see what's driving the costs are, 100 students out of the 5,000 are eligible for a claim of $4.3 million. And nobody's seeking to deny those claims, but it is a reality. You heard earlier about the cost of just transportation. It is a significant expenditure, and it's really because of the tremendous things that can be done with students today that couldn't be done 20 or 30 years ago. So again, it's significant to just bear in mind. School choice enrollment. We touched on this earlier, a question and so forth. Right now, we've got 52 students enrolled. You can see we've been around 50 for the last few years. The tuition received is $377,000 the last year. The balance is 1.5. And again, you'll see it later on. We've already touched upon it. At this point, there needs to be some sort of plan of going forward with those monies. Where the students come from, again, I just updated this from last year. It's it's unchanged. Most of them come from Lowell. 42 out of the 52 come from there. Others come from some other nearby communities. In terms of where our students go, we do send 32 Chelmsford students do go out through school choice. Majority of them go to Westford. 10 of them of the 32 go to Westford. Others go to distant places. That could be due to family members who may be educators in those systems and so forth. But the most important thing is probably the red, and I didn't want to put a separate slide for it, but I think the important thing is the red language or the bottom language in that. We also have 122 students in charter schools, primarily Innovation Academy, and then we're assessed $1.77 million from our state aid in the current fiscal year for that cost. So that's a real cost to the community that when we often look at the one side of the equation, well, how much Chapter 70 money are we getting from the state for education? We're also seeing education funding going out the other end of the equation towards charter schools because of the state's charter school funding formula. Average teacher salary, it was talked about earlier. The most recent year, FY '18, we're now in '19, was just under $79,000. So it's not unrealistic to think that it's around $80,000 per teacher. And if it isn't, it will be next year in terms of what it costs to put a person in front of the students in the classroom. And that's average. And the enrollment at Neshoba Tech was discussed earlier. We're down 12 students. And you can see, if you look to the last, few years, we've been around, we were 185 back in 16, we're 186 in 20, so you can see there really hasn't been a dramatic change. It was we were sort of trending up. We saw where we were a year ago, but you can see really where we took off from back in 12 as they came out of the building project with 133 students. So that's sort of, when you saw the 10-year numbers, that sort of gives you the insight as well what happened there. But I think what we're seeing now is that leveling taking place. In terms of employees, again, we're not hiring like crazy on the town side. If you go back to fiscal year 2008, we had 240.8 general government employees, not counting the sewer enterprise, which is a standalone operation that funds itself from sewer revenues. We're now 247. So again, not a materially significant increase in employees, again, over the past decade. Inflation, I think this is something you heard it touched upon earlier in the presentations. We're starting to see inflation creep back, 2.5% in 2017 calendar year, 3.3% through the latest numbers through September. The numbers only get released every other month, so we won't see the November numbers till January, then you'll get the final year number sometime in February. But obviously inflation is starting to creep in as we're seeing it with interest rates and so forth. And so that's obviously something to bear in mind, is because, again, our 2.5% is 2.5. It's not a variable number on inflation. So as inflation increases, it constrains us in terms of maintaining what we have. Similar to what Dr. Lang presented earlier and Dr. Pigeon showed in terms of the fixed costs or other budgetary factors going forward, again, we want to maintain the quality of our services while meeting our labor contracts, retirements, and health insurance, the pay schedules. You saw the school numbers. I'll bring them back at the end of this in the slides, but on the general government side, looking at 2%, you're talking $625,000. The Neshoba Tech assessment, I'm using a conservative number. I've got 82,000 as a floating number. I'm hoping it's too high. I expect that it is, given that our enrollment is falling by the district. But again, so that's, so I'm just carrying a number right now of 3,125 in the budgetary aspect. What isn't a floating number and is a fixed number is the Middlesex County Retirement Assessment. John explained at a budget meeting a couple months ago, Middlesex County Retirement completed their actuarial assessment, which they're required to do by law every 2 years. They've now given us our funding formula for the next 2 years in our assessment, and this year it goes up over $500,000, or 6.5%. So we're now going to spend $8.9 million to the county retirement system. And if that isn't bad enough, the worst part is where it's going. Look at that fourth column called payment on unfunded liability.
I don't want to.
You don't want to look at it, but that's where the story is. Right now, the payment level is $6.87 million. It's going up to $7.56 million, and then going out to 21, it goes up even more. It goes up by $639,000 to $8.15 million. Now, the normal cost, which is the just daily operations of what we're doing on a daily basis, the first left-hand column, that number is pretty steady. 1.5, 1.47, 1.3. And then we've already exhausted the early retirement decisions that were made back in '92 and 2002, which you notice they don't do those anymore because they found out they weren't worthwhile, because you ended up paying assessments on those who retired, even though you paid the new people at lower salary, you also paid health insurance on those people and OPEB. So you don't hear those programs anymore. But those have been exhausted, and they're gone by the boards now in fiscal year 19. So again, we will be cutting a check for because we do the July 1 payment to get the prepay early discount, $8.3 million of what we're paying this year. Next year it'll go up to $8.87 million. And again, of that $8.87 million, of that $543,000 increase, 7.56 of it goes to pay the unfunded pension liability. Now, the difficult news with this is that unfunded pension liability is due to be paid off in 2037 by state law. So we're less than 20 years there. The difficult part is that we're less than 50% funded in the system. And so that's why you're seeing that number continue to increase. And a couple reasons why it's increasing, if I'll get into the weeds here for a second. One is the mortality tables are changing because more people are living longer. And also the investment returns from the market are having to be brought down because you're no longer getting 8.5% returns from the market on average. So those two numbers are what's driving that unfunded pension liability. So again, it's a sobering piece of news, for this year and going forward. The other one is health insurance. I'm estimating a 6% increase in the premiums. We've got an older population in Chelmsford, so our claims and our demographics skew towards older, so that's why it's roughly 6%, although I think if it is 6%, that's probably good because we've seen double-digit years. So again, if that takes place, and again, there's uncertainty because we're benchmarked to the Group Insurance Commission, and we won't see their plan design come out in premiums probably till February, March period, but we're estimating an increase of $475,000. And in terms of the subscribers on this health insurance, again, we put the slide up here to indicate some trends. The key one is the far right. In 2019, we have 1,553 subscribers or individual plans, and you can see the number of retirees is now 914 of that 1,553. That's an increase overall of 120 additional health plan subscribers in the last 5 years, which is an 8.37% increase. The retirees, there's 84 more retiree subscribers than there were 5 years ago, and that's over a 10% increase. And for active employees, it's 36 more subscribers, or almost a 6% increase in 5 years. And that's with plan design change. So even though we're increasing co-payments, the deductibles, and following the state's benchmark plan, we're particularly seeing significant growth in retirees, but even that in terms of active employees. So again, it's something to be cognizant of in terms of, again, those aren't discretionary. We've got to meet those obligations. Non-excluded debt service, as John noted, we're trending down on a non-excluded debt service which is now will be $7.5 million in FY20. This is a nominal decrease of almost $20,000, or 0.24%. What will go up, though, is our Medicare tax. That's based on payroll. So we're budgeting that at just under $1 million in Medicare tax for fiscal year 20. It's an increase of $44,000, or 4.67%. Now comes into the gray area. A year ago, March, or will be this coming March, Governor Baker signed into law the OSHA law from Massachusetts, which requires that all municipalities and state and other governments in the Commonwealth, such as entities, water districts, and so forth, have to meet the federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration standards for public employee workplaces, starting this February 1st, so in less than 2 months. We need to employ an OSHA safety compliance officer to ensure compliance with these standards. And I'm budgeting a number at $80,000 for that figure. And what's this person going to do? It all has to do with compliance and training. And this has to do with issues such as the trenches that are out in the highways, digging in the roadway, to safety conditions in school kitchens, to ladder handling, facility maintenance, chainsaw use, bloodborne pathogens in terms of exposure, police and fire. And again, it does include police and fire. So believe it or not, there are OSHA requirements that we're examining for police and fire as well. It obviously has to do with accident investigation and safety and health audits and so forth, in addition to the reporting. So basically, we need a person, and we're out advertising right now for a person who's going to be the town-wide OSHA safety compliance officer. Obviously, this OSHA law has been in effect in the private sector, so we anticipate we'll probably hire somebody from the private sector who has the experience, which again, this is another new cost, I guess, for lack of a better word, but obviously it's a safety consideration for municipal employees in the year ahead. The next one is something that I'm bringing forth for your consideration, and this is the idea of a community services coordinator. And what this position and person would do is, I'm not looking to have town councilors, but what we see is a complexity of what's going on out there in the world today, where we need somebody, much like the veterans agent. If you're a veteran and you have needs or issues or assistance with the VA or veterans benefits and so forth, we have a veterans agent in the community. And if you're in the schools, quite frankly, the guidance counselors have become the cure-all for the students. I mean, guidance counselors, the generations ago was, well, that's the person who helps you, well, wish I apply for college and get your transcript off. Right now, the guidance counselors are the social workers, for lack of anything, in the schools. I mean, they're handling a variety of tactics. What my concern is that there's a big gap between the veteran services that we provide for veterans, which is obviously not a significant portion of our population, and basically, activities outside of the schools. And this has the issues that we sometimes see with our parents or younger parents and so forth, having to do with home care services, counseling services for people who are addressing issues of anxiety, depression, trauma, drug and alcohol use, family conflict, problems with marriage, problems with teenage in a home, food assistance, fuel assistance, financial assistance, substance abuse, domestic violence, behavioral problems. Now the question is, well, who's handling that today in the community? Well, it's being done in what I call a web of programs, from either the Board of Health with the public health nurse, to the police department, to the senior center, to others. But what there really is my concern is I think there's people going through the cracks. Plus, I think it's so complex what we do today, is I don't think people know where to get started or where to go to. And so my sense is we ought to employ somebody who actually would locate in the town offices, not at the senior center, not in the health office, but almost very similar to the veterans agent. There'd be this community services coordinator, or sometimes they call them human services coordinator, or family and support services personnel, whose job is to just be the advocate and be the resource to point someone, hey, if you need assistance, we can get you in touch with CTI, we can get you in touch with this program for mental health, or this program for food bank, and so forth. And again, I'd like to say I'm the first one who thought of this, but it isn't. If you go to many other communities, you will see such positions in places such as Acton, Burlington, Natick, Bedford, and so forth, that they have such a person who's sort of this resource person. Again, I think this is probably the first time I brought something like this forward in the community in my dozen years. But we've recently spent some time at the senior center sitting around the table with the age-friendly community initiative, where we've been discussing senior needs, but it's not senior needs, it's age needs across the community. And in sitting at the table with the police, with the Board of Health, and with the veterans agent, and so forth, I think all would agree, and it really hit me that we need some resource, because and actually it would free up the people to go back to their primary jobs in terms of the policing in other areas. So I think to have such a person, a social worker, a lack of better term, would probably be about $70,000 to have somebody. Again, we're not looking for somebody to run an agency, we're not looking for somebody to do counseling, but you just need a go-to person to meet these type of needs. So the other thing that I'm proposing in the budget that I think is worthy of consideration is to increase the funding for the senior work program. Right now, the town, and for several years, the town has funded that at $100,000. There's been about roughly 150 participants in that program. The average earnings have been $650. The state law allows the program to fund up to $1,500 per participant, or 125 hours, whichever is greater. Because if you're now paying a minimum wage of $13, at 125 hours, it's actually $16.25, I believe, if you do the math. What I'm proposing is that Chelmsford increase its funding level to $1,000 per participant, and that would provide roughly 75 hours per participant. So again, that would require a budgetary increase in the account for that by $50,000. So again, if you summarize all of this, the OSHA safety compliance officer, the community counselor, the worker program. I also believe, in speaking with Chief Spinney, that the middle school resource officer, shared officer, has been tremendously successful. It's our opinion, and I'll put it out there as my job as manager. I believe the community would be best served if we have a middle school resource officer full-time at each middle school, because I think in today's world, as we're in 2020, a lot of the problems that are arising for our youth and issues that go on, they're hitting these kids before they're getting to high school. And so I think it'd be a worthwhile investment to have a middle school resource of full-time dedicated at both the McCarthy and the Parker schools. And then we also have aging facilities. We talked about that. We think roughly about $35,000 would meet the increased cost needs for the facilities. And then I also have to fund the full fiscal year funding for the second health inspector that was provided at fall town meeting that will start next month for 6 months. I have to fully fund that for the year. And then also, in the world of property insurance, premiums aren't going down. You may have noticed in your own individual homes and so forth. We just had a new valuation of our property. So the combination of the rising rates and the total valuation of our property, then I need a $20,000 increase in our property insurance budget for the year ahead. And that's a definite, and I think that's a two-step program. I think we'll actually see step 2 in fiscal '21. So you add that up, it's roughly $325,000. So again, if you take into consideration the school increases that we heard of earlier of $2 million, and then take into the budgetary factors that I've gone through of roughly, it all comes out to another $2 million. So you're roughly at $4 million of total increases between the Neshoba Tech, the retirement, the health insurance, the general government needs that I just described. So now you look at the other side of the equation in terms of, well, what are our available revenue sources? I touched upon them earlier. The main one, as we said, 70% of our revenue comes from the property tax. The allowed increase under 2.5 would be $2.4 million. We're anticipating new growth of 1.5 million. Again, I don't think that's overly conservative. This year that we're in right now was $1,510,000. And roughly, the year before that was 125. The only anomaly was 17, that was when they did the townwide valuation. So again, if you take the 2.4 and the 1.5, that gives you 3.9 million. On the state aid, my guess at this point would be, we'd probably realistically, and based on what we've seen, get $30 per student, that's $150,000. And then if they increase the general government aid to match the growth in the state budget, my estimate is 2.4%. And that's another 225%. So now you've got roughly $275,000 in state aid on the revenue side. Obviously, we don't know the assessments, but so we'll just use this as a gross number at this point in time. And again, I will reiterate it because it just shows you the chapter education funding, and the critical column there is the right-hand column. So when you say, well, why are you just forecasting such a $150,000 increase for fiscal year 20? Well, look what it was in 19. Look what it was in 18. Look what it was almost every year other than 17. It was, $128,000 to $150,000. In this case, past performance is an indicator of future results, given that you have, nothing on the state level in terms of additional state revenues coming in, nor an administration that has shown any likelihood of, at this point in time, of bringing in new revenues. Again, they're still wrestling with the marijuana implementation. They haven't figured out what to do. They're still wrestling with the casino openings, and they haven't figured out what to do with the online gaming, lottery, and also sports wagering. And so, knowing how the legislature moves, we saw that it took 2 years to implement the marijuana law. I don't anticipate that we're going to see any great windfall in state aid in the year ahead. At local receipts, as Darlene mentioned earlier, I think we've peaked. I'm using 10,425, which is level from this year. You can see we had 10,435 in 18. The numbers right now, early numbers in 19 are slowing slightly under that. So again, I'm not being overly conservative. The key drivers there are just two big numbers. Motor vehicle excise, 5.4 million. And there's only been 1 year that was more than that, and that was in 18, where again, we think that was our peak. And then permits at $1,150,000. The challenge with those numbers is those are discretionary items. And when you get into an economic slowdown or downturn, people can postpone purchasing of new vehicles or leasing new vehicles, and also they can postpone permit activity. And if you look back at some of the years, as you saw where we are now at a peak, you can see, that those numbers can come in hundreds of thousands of dollars less as we sort of came through the slow recovery. And so, and particularly in the area of permits, the first year we ever hit $1 million in permit activity was just a couple of years ago. It had never been reached before. So it's not unrealistic to think that if things stall or slow down, that that these numbers aren't aggressive. So that's what I'm budgeting at this point. So if you pull it all together, you're roughly at $4.2 million between basically your property tax and your additional state aid, which is roughly a 3.2% increase from the current budget. And then what I try to do is, again, the schools are initiating their budget process. I'm giving them a guideline to start to work on their efforts. I think it's $2 million, roughly 3.27%, which is roughly proportionate to what I increase is the increase in the overall budget of the town of 3.2%. So if I'm sitting here today and giving them guidance, and obviously you heard the other side of the equation, if they're just maintaining their operations, the $2 million is what's needed. So I'm anticipating an appropriation of $61 million for the Chelmsford Public Schools at this period of time, and obviously that can be further flushed out in the weeks ahead as things become clearer. What will really become clear is when the governor releases his budget the last Wednesday and the third Wednesday in January, and we'll then have some clarity in terms of what their agenda may be. Be interesting to see what may come up. But I want to close on a informative thing. And you can see by the title, we're no longer in Taxachusetts. It's fun to see some of the suggestions and words thrown out there. But this study just came out a couple weeks ago. by the Mass Budget and Policy Center, and I'll read it because I think it's important. The U.S. Census Bureau released its annual update of state and local government finances, providing nationwide state-level data for fiscal year 2016. So again, it's not my data, it's U.S. Census Bureau. Here's their conclusion. The amount of state and local taxes paid in Massachusetts as a share of total personal income was 10.2% in fiscal year 2016. By this measure, i.e. state and local taxes percentage of personal income, 10.2%, Massachusetts was on par with the national average and had lower taxes than 17 other states, and most significantly, Massachusetts tax levels are lower than the tax levels in most other northeastern states. So, and again, if you think about it, it kind of makes some sense, because what have we seen happen at the local level in Massachusetts over the last decade or so? Proposition 2.5 as a constraint, and the gradually reduction in the state income tax because of the fact that the state hit its revenue targets that went that way. So, so I think, again, no one likes to pay taxes, but it is the cost of providing essential governmental services in the community. So again, a summary and conclusions. Again, I think it's not just Chelmsford, but all communities across the Commonwealth have got to go to the state as our partners and say, look, folks, we need some additional help from the state to support local operations, and therefore we should support the Mass Municipal Association and other efforts to get additional Chapter 70 educational funding. We also have a significant shortfall in Chapter 90, which is the gas tax for roadway funding. The state's roughly funding us at about 40% of what's needed to really meet the annual improvements in our roads. And that's because nobody will touch the gas tax again because of the ballot question that was rescinded, 5-6 years ago, when they were trying to index it to inflation. So again, we're hurting in terms of infrastructure. Examine local fees. At the local level, we should also examine to see whether our license and permit fees are comparable to similar communities. I can give an example. I've been here, again, starting my 13th year. We have the same liquor license fees that we had when I arrived. I don't know if they're too high or too low, but I think it at least warrants an investigation to say, hey, look, where are our permit fees compared to our comparable communities? And then I sort of throw one that's a little bit off the wall in terms of the school department. I think obviously no one likes to talk about transportation and student activity fees, but we ought to look at it to see whether our fees are comparable to comparable communities or similar communities, but any alternative. And again, this sort of might come back to the state, the school choice money and so forth. You might want to consider the elimination or reduction of those fees. I remember, and I was sitting at this table when those fees were voted in, and it was painful. Nobody liked it. People gnashed their teeth, and but perhaps it's time to look at, is it something that we could either do away with, or because I think, first of all, it would shock the heck out of anybody that a town actually got rid of a fee, but also it might assist you that when the time comes and if things do go to a crunch, that you could then say, hey, look, this is temporary, and we hope to be able to relax it at a future time. But again, that segues into the next one, is there ought to be a plan for school choice funding, given where we are. I know the school committee will discuss even what is school choice enrollments are going to be in the years ahead. I know that's an annual discussion where they look at the grade configuration and obviously what choice students have moved out of or will be graduating from the district, and also where they may be room. But again, the other thing is on that school choice thing, and I know Jay can attest to this, that funding level for school choice has been $5,000 since as long as I can remember. And again, maybe that's a pushback to the state saying, hey, look, if you want to encourage choice and this idea of holding districts to performance and so forth, well, maybe the revenue from choice ought to really correspond. If we're spending, $14,000, $15,000 to educate a student, well, then maybe the choice monies ought to be more than the $5,000, and plus the allowance they give for special ed. So again, that's something to consider.
That, I checked on that last year, that has never been changed
Yeah.
since 1992.
Yeah. So
The
that-
5,000,
Right.
so, I mean, if the average spending is 15,000 now, even if they went school choice up to 7,500,
Right.
you'd still only be getting half of what
Right.
the average, and
So again, it's something I think to discuss. And then the concluding one is budget carefully. Again, we're utilizing the fullest extent of the property tax, so we have no real cushion in terms of sustainable revenue. Again, I think there's no indication that Chapter 70 educational funding reform will significantly benefit us, nor is there any indication of any significant future increase in other state aid. And again, these employee cost drivers in terms of benefits are not expected to diminish over time. And there is the likelihood that a recession or economic slowdown is maybe on the horizon, or maybe already in effect as we sit here today. So with that, again, the conclusion would be on several weeks from now, on the 28th of January, I'll be presenting my proposed operating capital budgets at the Selectmen's meeting, distributing it to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee will be holding its hearings, and as soon as we know it, we'll be at town meeting in April, presenting this plan. So with that, I thank you for your patience in listening to my presentation, and I think at this point, we can open up to general discussion to me, or, Dr. Lang, John, Darlene, Dr. Pigeon, anyone here. Yes, Emily?
So I was going back to the volunteer program for seniors for tax relief. I understand what the benefit to the seniors is.
Yeah.
I also know that sometimes these programs have a greater benefit to the town, that the work that is done by volunteers represents a huge savings to what would ordinarily be a paid position. And given increased minimum wage, given a request for an increase of 50,000, this is on page 57.
Yep.
I was wondering if you have any idea what the benefit of those hours worked done is to the town. Because again, if you're looking at elected officials, for example, were not paid, but the work we do represents hours and hours of otherwise paid positions, and governments would not function without volunteers. So I think this is one of those things where if there's an argument to be made for this, it might be a good idea to look at the benefit to the town. I completely understand the benefit to the seniors. This often benefits some of our neediest seniors who are on other programs who desperately need this relief. And I understand who does this. I know some people who benefit from this. But I think that the larger argument might be looking at the actual benefit of that work received. So.
You mean by elected officials? Is that
No,
what you're saying?
by the seniors doing these work tax.
Oh.
So what is the work
It's
that
hard.
they do?
It's anecdotal. I mean, if it's 75 hours, it's roughly 2 weeks of total time in a year. And yes, it's valuable. I mean, I can tell you they appreciate it around census time in the clerk's office and John's office, and they induce for it. But I don't know how you quantify it because, if they weren't there, work would have to be picked up. But again, it amounts to basically a 2-week process. And again, they often come in not on a 2-week period. They come in roughly 4 or 5 hours a week over several months. So it's sort of some backfilling, quite honest. But I don't know how to quantify it in terms of what it would mean if we lost that, nor could I quantify what it would mean if we lost the volunteers at the library and so forth. It would, and I know
It's
they try to do
huge.
that. It's huge, exactly.
It's huge, but if there's some way of
Well, that's the equivalent to 5.5 minimum wage workers over the
Yeah.
course of a year.
Yeah,
So minus pensions and health insurance for them,
yeah,
that's the benefit.
yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Kathy?
I wanted to ask Dr. Lang a question. It's about the Medicaid reimbursements. I see that that's gone down. So for FY 2018, the actual was 411,000 and change, and
Kathy, what page you on?
I'm on the local receipts, page 66. It's Medicaid reimbursement. I wonder how that is going, or has something happened in the program where the school department is less aggressive in submitting the forms?
It's going up.
This year is actually,
It is going back up?
it's going back up.
Because it says, I have got 411, then I've got 350.
350 is the budget for this year,
Okay,
and then my forecast for next year is 400.
okay,
Yeah.
so,
But it's gone up in recent years.
There.
Before that, it was 400, then it was 310,
okay,
319.
so,
No, they're doing a really good job of
They are.
claiming everything that they can. It's gone up over the last couple of years.
I'm sorry.
I think maybe just conservative budgeting,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
the actuals were going up.
Good.
Paul, you had made a comment that we have 122 students in the charter schools.
Yeah.
And that's costing us $1.7 million.
That's our assessment from the state, yes.
If those 122 students were in our system, would we spend the additional $15,000 per pupil that we're spending now?
No, because you're looking at marginal cost versus average cost. For example, and that's sort of, in other words, if you've got a classroom with 18 students and you put in 2 extra students, it's not costing you $30,000 to educate those 2 kids. And so that's the difference between marginal cost and versus average cost. So I don't know what those numbers would
We'd
be.
end up with larger classrooms.
Exactly. It would depend on larger classrooms. And then you do hit a tipping point, and we've seen that with
Right.
with changes in enrollment. So, and then there is a big cost. So first of all, it's never going to happen. But second of all, I don't know how you quantify that, because we'd have to really look at what grades are these students in,
Right.
and then where would they come back. But that's been the dilemma is the state, not meeting its obligation to fully fund the charter school reimbursements.
But I guess my only point is that even though we're being charged 1.7, we're ending with smaller classrooms, sizes, better student-to-teacher ratios.
Right, in some instances, right, but.
Yeah, but it's all relative to, because we really don't know right now, like what particular school or classroom those kids would be in.
Right.
To see how they would affect the size. It could be a situation where, if, 1 or 2 kids in a classroom, let's say there's 22 kids in the classroom, it's gonna go down to 20. Obviously, you wouldn't make a change.
Right.
If you're gonna add 2 kids as well, you can go from 22 to 24, you wouldn't really make a change. But if your number was at 24, 25, 26 already,
You
and
would
you're gonna
have to.
add, you might have to. So you'd really have to do some analysis to figure out where those kids are coming from, where they would be, to figure that out. It wouldn't be a dollar for dollar. I mean, you wouldn't be
Right.
adding.
But there is some benefit to not, I mean, you do end up with
Well,
smaller
on our
classroom
end, I mean, it
sizes.
certainly does, help class size, but it's also, there is some flux too, because we do have students that, might try a charter school and then don't particularly like it and come back to us. So there is some movement among those numbers as well.
Okay.
But I think if you asked any superintendent, would you take the charter school or the monies, you take the kids and the money, because that's clearly the case, because it really has been a drain to public education by the charter school system and net. But you're right, it's not a net number, it's a gross number.
Now, has our enrollment to the charter school varied since, there was 2 big factors. They moved to Tingsboro,
Yeah.
and then they added the high school, but
Right.
I thought when they moved to Tingsboro, our enrollment at the charter school actually declined a little bit.
Slightly, but it's been pretty steady the last few years. We haven't seen a
I think
big.
it's leveled off.
Yeah.
I honestly have not spent a great deal of time tracking the charter school numbers, but I anecdotally have heard, once the charter school moved from Chelmsford to Tingsboro, because then parents have to provide their own transportation, it's more difficult to obviously get there. I think the numbers are basically leveled off. I don't think you're seeing any major declines or any major spikes. I think it pretty much is what it is at this point.
And in the past, a lesser percentage of students decided to continue through high school, and some came back after 8th grade, was my recollection.
Yeah, they can really decide at any point.
Yeah.
I mean, they could just get a good experience and decide to come back mid-year if they really wanted to. But some do that. I mean, we obviously in the district have increasing enrollments we've talked about at the elementary school grade level, and we have capacity at the high school grade level. So that is some of the discussion we'll have with the school committee when we talk about school choice. We've been taking a look at our recommendations over the last couple of years of when we take school choice kids in, because they are now going to be part of our kind of revenue in the budget, to be able to do that at the high school level. We'd much rather have a student come to us to start high school and finish with us, again, than not have them, say, pop in 2nd grade or 3rd or 4th or 5th grade. Have them come at a natural start when our kids are also starting. So that's been a strategy we've been doing. We actually haven't taken school choice kids at the elementary school grade level over the last couple of years, and I anticipate making recommendations that really have it limited to the high school, because that's where we have capacity in the coming years. And probably keeping it flat, right around that 50 students per year, not growing it, but because we have become and will become reliant on that revenue, keeping it right there.
Paul, those 2 proposed new personnel, those figures you provided, do those include benefits insurance?
No, that's just roughly, I think, of what the pay range would be for that, what that would be for that position. We would have to account for that in our estimate if we were to bring those people on board.
Thank you.
But oftentimes, the big question is always be, what are you going to pay this person?
Mhm.
And what we've seen with the health insurance enrollment is that it's a bit unpredictable. Because retirees can come in every year into open enrollment, and employees can modify every year into open enrollment, so it's not, it's a bit
And
of a
the
challenge.
private sector,
Yeah.
private sector too, yeah.
Any further discussion? If not, like I said, it is almost 9:15, so what we can do is we can, if the chair will have a motion to go into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the general government and school department employee labor unions. Has to be a roll call vote of the selectmen, school committee, and finance committee.
So I'll make a motion to go into executive session.
Not to return.
Oh, not to return.
Not to return to open session, yeah.
Second?
We have a vote?
Yeah, just do a roll call around the room, because it's all three boards.
Over there?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all right, majority of each of the unanimous of all.
Considering how many bottles and cups, maybe we'll take a 5-minute break.
Sure, of course, yeah. Also give telemedia a chance to take down the room, too. Yeah, thank you.
So how much do they sell the whole room for?